Manufacturing Matters is an MFG Radio Network production brought to you by GIE Media's Manufacturing Group as industry experts take deep dives into the latest manufacturing matters, whether it's new innovations, products, technologies, and emerging markets that help you understand better why manufacturing matters to you and also to the top companies in the medical, aerospace, defense, and electric vehicle manufacturing industries.
Hello, and welcome to Aerospace Industry Outlook Spring 2025, presented by Richard Aboulafia, brought to you by Aerospace Manufacturing and Design magazine. I'm Eric Brothers, editor for the magazine and the webinar moderator. Aviation industry expert Richard Aboulafia will examine current aerospace markets and what to expect as aerospace firms get ready to report their first quarter results. The particular focus: what are aerospace original equipment manufacturers' production rate plans? How will the current economy affect forecasts for the rest of this year and next? What adjustments are the OEMs making to deal with tariffs? Our presenter, Richard Aboulafia, Fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society, is Managing Director, Aerodynamic Advisory, Ann Arbor, Michigan. As many of you know already, Mr. Aboulafia is widely respected as an aviation industry expert and contributor to Aerospace Manufacturing and Design's annual forecast issue. Since 1988, Richard has tracked aircraft programs, markets, and companies as an analyst and consultant. He manages consulting projects in the commercial and military aviation field and analyzes broader defense and aerospace market and industry trends. Prior to joining Aerodynamic in January 2022, he was vice president of analysis at Teal Group. There, in addition to his consulting role, he wrote and edited Teal Group's World Military and Civil Aircraft Briefing, a forecasting and analysis tool covering more than 135 aircraft programs and markets. He's advised numerous aerospace companies, including most prime and many second and third tier contractors in the US, Europe, and Asia. He also advises numerous financial institutions on aerospace market conditions. Frequently cited as an aviation industry authority by trade and news publications, Richard has appeared on numerous television news and radio programs, including ABC, BBC, Bloomberg, Reuters, CBS, CNN, NBC, NPR, and PBS. Before we begin, we'd like to thank our manufacturing group, our series sponsor. Renishaw was born out of the aerospace business. When Rolls-Royce was unable to find a measuring device with the accuracy it needed for Concorde's instrumentation pipes, its founder built one. It was the touch trigger probe, a revolutionary piece of manufacturing technology that became the company's first product. The industry has changed a lot since then, but the twin drivers of efficiency and safety remain key requirements to which Renishaw technologies contribute to help manufacturers undertake repeatable, traceable, efficient work to the finest tolerances. Renishaw helps manufacturers throughout the supply chain so that every component meets its design intent. Renishaw has particular expertise in controlling the manufacture of blades and components for engines. Discover more at www.renishaw.com/aerospace. We'd also like to thank Nagata Engineering, founded in 1895 as the oldest existing horizontal-focused machine tool builder in Japan. Known for their significant performance advancements, Nagata's high-rigidity, boxway, 5-axis trunnion series solutions for complex aerospace and defense applications are equipped with a one-piece casting trunnion table. Both ends of the table are supported by robust roller bearings and worm wheel drives. This mechanical structure emphasizes stable machining accuracy throughout the work effort. High horsepower and torque allow you to take full advantage of the rigid machine frame. For hard metals, high torque, heavy-duty spindles are available with up to 1,438 foot-pounds of torque. OSG USA is a subsidiary of OSG Corporation, founded in 1938 and headquartered in Japan. OSG is a leading manufacturer of taps, end mills, drills, and indexable cutting tools. OSG's extensive line of high-technology cutting tools features exclusive metallurgy, cutting geometries, and proprietary surface treatments to help increase productivity, reliability, and tool life. OSG also serves the fastener industry by offering a complete line of thread-rolling, flat, cylindrical planetary rack and trim dies. Solar Atmospheres provides commercial vacuum heat treating with brazing services in markets including aerospace and defense. With more than 90 vacuum furnaces from web size to 48 feet long with 150,000-pound capacity, Solar Atmospheres can handle any size job. It operates plants in eastern and western Pennsylvania, California, Michigan, and South Carolina, all ISO 9001, 2015, AS9100D, and NADCAP registered for heat treating. Suraluz is a leader in the development of advanced manufacturing technology for machining large, complex parts, such as the airframes, engines, and landing gear components critical to the aerospace and aeronautical industries. Explore these advanced technologies that include five-axis machining, vibration control, and automation, and learn how these innovations optimize processes and increase reliability in their latest white paper, Shaping Aerospace Progress. Download the free white paper at suraluz.com. State of the art now, it's in need of clarity. While the agreement on trade and civil aircraft generally exempts aerospace components from tariffs, the 1979 Treaty on Zero-Duty Trading in Aerospace includes the U.S. and Canada, but not Mexico. The recent implementation of new tariffs by the U.S., including those on steel and aluminum, has consequences for the global aerospace industry. Much uncertainty exists about Trump administration tariffs, with opinions pro and con flooding the news. Will tariff negotiations level manufacturing playing field, or will the imposition of new or expanded tariffs precipitate a global recession? Industry executives have warned that putting tariffs on aerospace parts would create more headaches for suppliers that have struggled due to the pandemic and the OEM's recent lower output. There is the possibility of a cooling economy that will lower projections of record global passenger traffic and hence demand for new jetliners. Yet commercial aircraft orders continue, with more than 250 orders that Airbus and Boeing announced or confirmed in the past month. We asked Richard to explain what members of the aerospace supply chain need to know to prepare for what's ahead. Is it expect more turbulence, or is there smooth air ahead? Richard, over to you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Really appreciate AMD for hosting, and of course to everyone for tuning in, and to our sponsors. Thank you. My objective today is to outline all of that more in the space of about 18 or 20 PowerPoint slides, and be responsive to questions afterwards. About 15 years ago, Michelle Walker wrote a terrific book about the gray rhino, yet another taxonomical metaphor to follow on from the black swan. Black swans, of course, are things you never would have imagined. This is a dumb gray rhino. It's been coming at us. The metaphor was basically meant to say, sometimes there are things that are charging at you. You don't notice them. You don't do anything about them. This is one of those moments. It's either a very good time or a very bad time to be having a conversation about markets, because, as you say, Eric, everything could change as a consequence of what's going on right now, or maybe we'll get out of it. I'll present my views first about tariffs and top of mind stuff, then get on to where we are in markets and industry, well, part of it we'll just see. Next page, please. Thanks. First of all, wow, I can't begin to state the gravity of this moment. It feels a lot like 2008, only possibly much worse. You know, one way I would put it is a simple phrase: I don't think this is a negotiation. And that's true on 4 different levels. One, the conversation we can have as good people isn't really a negotiation. It's out of our control. We're in it. We'll find out. This could be truly ruinous and catastrophic, or maybe it'll get settled up in a few days and it'll all be over like a nightmare. This is not a negotiation. We're in it. We'll see you on the other side. Second, this is not a negotiation from the standpoint of international trade partners. It isn't. Yes, there are some people like Vietnam or Zimbabwe that don't really hold a lot of cards here. They're going to beg for some kind of, terms of surrender or whatever else. But for the overwhelming majority of the world trade entities, blocks, countries, there's no room for negotiation. For example, Canada, they found themselves in the position of having their territorial sovereignty threatened. They're not in the mood to negotiate. About 2 months ago, you had the opposition candidate, Poilievre, with I believe, a 25-point lead over the Liberals. And Mark Carney came in and said, we've got to defend ourselves against the US. The result is a 31-point shift. That doesn't happen in politics. Can you imagine if 31% of either the Republicans or Democrats suddenly went to the other side? That it's not conceivable, but in Canada it happened. What does it mean? It means that for Mark Carney, it would be political suicide to negotiate. Similarly, if you're President Xi, anyone who knows anything about doing a business in China knows that for him, it would be political suicide to negotiate. Then there's the EU. Ursula von der Leyen, the EU foreign minister, has said, don't worry, 83% of our trade is unimpeded, the part with the rest of the world. We will go on. Meanwhile, China is reaching out to the US's former trading partners and allies, Japan, South Korea, and saying, don't worry, America's abandoning you. You can trade with us now. We're your new best friends. No one is going to negotiate with us. This has to come from the US. So next point, will the US bend, or more specifically, will the Trump administration bend? Sure doesn't look like it. This is part of their MO. For better or worse, they want to withdraw from the global order. That includes trade, that includes strategic alliances, that includes foreign policy niceties, that includes everything. Maybe you're for it, maybe you're against it, it doesn't matter. They're not going to change their minds, I don't think. It would be wonderful, I think, if they did. The Senate is showing signs that maybe it will push back. Congress might be pushing back, but you know what? If they don't, they might just go on break for the next 2 weeks, in which case this happens. We're in it. Which leads us to the third point. This is not a negotiation. What happened this weekend was Howmet, of course, one of the most important elements of the aerospace supply chain. As you know, titanium castings and forgings are one of the key bottlenecks, and it's a very well-run company, very profitable, 29% margins last quarter. I mean, just unbelievably well done. And they issued a force majeure statement. What does that mean? It means, wow, these are big tariffs, really big tariffs. We don't know who pays, but it's not going to be us. A force majeure says that all contracts are off. You want titanium castings and forgings, you'll pay for it. Even if we are the point of entry for, say, imported titanium sponge, we're not paying it. Someone else is. You're going to see more force majeure statements. And if that happens, and if international trade partners don't negotiate, and if Trump and company don't negotiate, this isn't a recession. Basically, the economy seizes up, and we have something that resembles 1929. That's bad. This morning, Delta Airlines suspended all guidance. Everyone's travel guidance is off. Everything is off until this gets settled. And if it doesn't, the consequences could be absolutely ruinous. So I hope I'm wrong about one of these three things, particularly the first two. I hope everyone involved goes to the negotiating table, because this is an industry that's based upon free trade. We've had free trade for as long as I've been in the business, 37 years, a lot longer than that, actually. There were no trade barriers, and that agreement on freight and civil aircraft that was negotiated in the 1970s that Eric just referenced, this is the first time that's been challenged. And basically the terms of the Trump tariffs that have been announced on, well, most of the world, completely violate the terms of that treaty. And this is an industry where the US has an enormous trade surplus. So very simply, we're sitting in a room full of gasoline playing with matches. That's not good. So big questions: how bad will the stock market, economy, and corporate profits get? Because of course they determine demand. How long before this damage impacts jet demand? Soon, if it goes ahead. Will backlogs provide much insulation? I can't begin to emphasize this enough. No, on the military side, sure. But, you know, there's a simple saying in the jetliner business: if an airline makes money, it orders planes. If it keeps making money, it takes delivery of those planes. There is not necessarily a connection. You can watch a backlog become completely meaningless, as we did, say, in the aftermath of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, or for that matter, back in 91 in the aftermath of Gulf War I. This market can turn on a dime. So all of this to say that what you're going to see in my presentation assumes that this gets settled and that markets are fine. That can still happen. But I'm more afraid right now than I've been trying to think back to 2008. But frankly, I think it's a lot worse than that, potentially. Next page, please. Where are we on the recovery? Well, we're not back to our industry output peak just yet. If you look at civil and military output in the business, we peaked back in the latter part of the last decade at 200 billion or so in new deliveries. Total economic value, actually several times this, because this is just the value of final deliveries, doesn't include the supply chain, doesn't include support, doesn't include a lot of stuff. Last year was terrible, but frankly, most of that was due to the Boeing strike, to a lesser extent, the Textron strike, and also the F-35 Block 4 delays. Basically, you had Fort Worth turned into the largest Air Force in North America outside the US. I think it was the 8th largest Air Force in the world just because of F-35s that were undelivered. Anyway, that's what suppressed output last year. Otherwise, we would have made a nice bit of progress. If you see that little dash line, that's where we would have been without those compounding problems. Next page, please. Now, it's sort of interesting if you look at this upturn compared to previous upturns and index it back to the start of those upturns, we're badly underperforming. If you look at that red line in jetliners on the left side of your chart, you can see we were doing pretty well for the first 3 years, that is to say up until 2023. But a lot of that were jets that were already built being delivered, 737 MAXs and 787s that needed to be modified. There wasn't a lot of manufacturing activity to show for that upturn. And sure enough, last year, things took a bit of a hit. Part of that was the Boeing strike again. Similarly, business aircraft demand has been really strong, but output's been pretty flat. And a lot of that is simply difficulties on the production side, not the market side. Again, tariffs are the only thing I'm concerned about from the market standpoint. The market was doing incredibly well. Next page, please. What are the production problems? Well, it's been likened to playing a game of whack-a-mole. One gopher pops up, you whack it, interiors, coatings, semiconductors, aerostructures, castings and forgings, whatever. They kept popping up, but you can put them under 4 different buckets. One is materials and parts shortages, particularly raw materials. Then you've got labor. That's only getting worse. A lack of investment, and that's because an awful lot of tier 2 and 3 suppliers were badly squeezed by the primes, particularly Boeing, but certainly others too. 120-day payment terms. Heck, one company at the top that I won't mention had 180-day payment terms. This is a recipe for starving small aerostructure shops of capital. That's a real problem. Then finally, unsustainable business models. You look at the business of aerostructures, you look at GKN, you look most of all at Spirit. It turns out the idea of an independent P&L that just does aerostructures has proven to be untenable. That's why Spirit's getting absorbed back in. That's why Airbus pulled back its divestiture of factories. It's why GKN is focusing purely on military and BizAv and I should say on engines and things like that. It's proven to be, again, an unsustainable business model. And until that all gets sorted out, there are problems. So all kinds of big issues. And again, the tariff thing would only make it just that much worse. A lot of bottlenecks, a lot of uncertainty that has been suppressing output. Positive side, again, I can't tell you how great markets have been. Markets have been as strong for the past few years as I've ever seen them. Again, hoping that's not changing. Next page, please. It's kind of interesting. If you index aircraft to all manufacturing output, that's the blue line. All manufacturing output is a fascinating data set put forth by the Federal Reserve. It's kind of perfect for me. It's called non-defense capital goods excluding aircraft. It couldn't be a more perfect data set. And of course, I've simply juxtaposed that with our aircraft output numbers. And you can see what happened sometime in the aftermath of the MAX shutdown and, of course, the pandemic. We sort of found ourselves lagging the rest of the world. What does that mean? It means that the aerospace industry was not first, as we normally are, to order stuff, to hire people, to buy machine tools. We were last. And we were hit hardest, therefore, by various supply chain constraints, various production delays, various skilled labor shortages, whatever else. We've been just generally hit more by these constraints and by inflation, frankly, than pretty much any other sector of the economy because of us being late for the first time to the recovery. So all of this is a new and unpleasant and unwelcome development. But again, just to emphasize the positive, till now, markets have been great. Next page, please. Where are we in air travel? Again, all of this done before the current tariff horror. Macroeconomics, they were great. Not great, just, stable with clouds. So in green territory, we've got in black the final end of last year compared with third quarter of 24. Getting a little bit, this is that gray rhino thing, right? This is, hey, is that a gray rhino coming at us? People beginning to pull back a bit on investments because you don't know what tariffs are going to be for foreign companies, whatever else. However, second bucket, air travel demand had only grown stronger. Really great year for air travel. People want to fly. Unfortunately, that's come crashing down, as it were, over the past couple of days. That's why Delta suspended guidance. Bookings from Canada and Mexico, bookings to the US in general are way, way down for reasons that are unfortunately obvious in the headlines. Aircraft demand still really strong, very stable, very positive. Aircraft supply, however, slightly better, but still in the red. And this too is a function of those production bottlenecks, getting a little bit better with the resolution of the Boeing strike, the resolution of the Textron strike we saw in the fourth quarter, everything getting resolved, but still in red, people not getting what they wanted by way of aircraft. Next page, please. Book to bill, pretty darn good. This is a simple measure of how many civil jets are ordered relative to what's being delivered. And you can see for the first time during the pandemic, it went into the negative territory, first time in the history of air transport, really, jet transport anyway. And then we had an incredible, look at that, couple of years. Things have come back down to earth, in part because there's no point in ordering stuff. And for a lot of jets, you got to wait till the next decade anyway. So it's only natural that things would normalize at a roughly 1-to-1 book-to-bill ratio. But otherwise, things had been extremely strong. And again, backlog staying intact. And again, yet another warning, all of this could change very fast and very suddenly if this trade thing doesn't get resolved very quickly. Next page, please. One interesting aspect, again, waiting for the tariffs, China's back. You look at the China market, they had peaked at about 23% of jetliner output in the world. That is to say, they were taking about 23%. Then they collapsed because they had an unpleasantly long pandemic and they had issues after that, various structural issues. Well, they're back. Last year, they took about, I believe, 17% of world output. So a really healthy recovery. And not only that, but look to the right, Boeing is back in China after a 5 or 6 year absence. They've come roaring back with the MAX. This is the first thing to watch as a consequence of these trade issues, these tariff disputes. A Boeing CEO a long time ago once told me a very memorable line. He said, in the event of a trade standoff, we are the designated hostage. And the wisdom of his words have kind of haunted me since. So that dark blue bar has the potential to collapse precipitously. Now, having said that, if the Chinese apply tariffs religiously, even Airbus jets would get tariffed because an awful lot of them have US content. So it's possible that maybe, just maybe, Other countries obey the terms of the WTO agreement on trade in civil aircraft, and even if they do impose trade, tariff barriers and whatever else, that at least just, maybe somehow will remain protected. But right now, it sure doesn't look that way. Next page, please. So looking at financial performance and revenue, Airbus is your full service company. Why? Look at that diamond in the middle. They've got pretty good EBIT. Way to look at it. Airbus has revenue and EBIT. Embraer has EBIT, but not revenue. And Boeing has revenue, but not EBIT. And Comac has neither. Maybe one day they'll be there. Who knows? But Boeing's got to get its act together before it recovers financially. And of course, they're a bit away from that. New leadership since we last spoke has, I think brings a great deal of promise, but still it's a long, long, long road back. As for Embraer, it's really interesting. One of the big conversations we've had in the industry, could they join the big jet club? The biggest thing they build right now is the E195 E2, 120 or so seats. Doesn't really get into Airbus and Boeing territory to any meaningful level. They're a great company. They're just a fantastic company. Now, is the EBIT part, encouraging? In other words, these guys make money when they build jet? Yeah, absolutely. But this is a $5.3 billion a year company. It's going to be a real stretch for them to find 10, 12 billion to launch a new large jet. So everyone wants them to do it. I wish they would. Can they? I don't know. They'd have to find a lot of backers, and certainly it can't come from their own internal cash flow. Next page, please. One thing that's interesting, I keep coming back to that wonderful term, the future is unwritten. There are a lot of possibilities out there. Again, looking at Embraer, maybe they'll go back to that next generation turboprop they've been mooting. Maybe it's a next generation narrow body, no matter how unlikely. Comac, all sorts of stuff being mooted, including a truly Chinese jet. The C919 is basically a Western jet with, Chinese aluminum over it, and of course, final assembly in China. But what if they reinvented it with their own indigenous engine and a lot of other indigenous content? That's something they're going to think about. Boeing, lots of stuff they could do, including, most interestingly, a truss-braced wing. Airbus, lots of stuff they could do too. But none of this is set in stone. None of this has been firmly launched. There's really not much in the pipeline at all, except for the 777X and, of course, the 737 MAX 10 and 7. They'll be arriving in the next couple of years. We hope. But other than that, there's a world of possibilities out there. And then, of course, there's, left field stuff. I'm really intrigued still by the blended wing body that Jet Zero has been pushing, and they're not going to build it themselves, but maybe someone else will build it with them. And that's kind of a potential game changer. So much that can happen out there. That would be fascinating. Next page, please. MRO, I know a lot of folks out there cover MRO. Maybe fewer of them consume machine tools and whatever else, but that is a solid growth market. It's reached 150 billion a year. It is shifting more towards narrow bodies. The market is favoring narrow bodies, and utilization reflects that. Therefore, maintenance, repair, and overhaul is reflecting that too. Next page, please. Turning to defense, solid market. This is one part of the industry I'm a lot less worried about. Unfortunately, it reflects, global tension and whatever else. The plan now, in theory, is for a US $1 trillion defense budget. That sounds big, but the previous plan had been to get most of the way there, so not much has changed. We're expecting, after inflation, 1 to 2% growth in the US. NATO countries at about 2%. This could be a lot higher. This is constant dollars, so big variable here is inflation. Either way, you're looking at a market in terms of addressable market. We're excluding China, Russia, North Korea, but we've blown through $2 trillion in defense spending. So, even if only say about a quarter of that or so is in procurement of equipment. That's still pretty damn big. Next page, please. Now, the new administration, relatively new. It's hard to believe it's only been 2 months, 3 months, something like that. A lot of uncertainty. We don't know what's going on. We don't know China policy. We do know that, defense ecosystem profits are poised to rise because they're gutting the federal workforce. If you get rid of oversight, profits go up. That's the way it works. NATO support, way, way, way down. The defense budget, probably up on top line, but inflation's going to go way up too. You increase demand, you erect trade barriers, you constrain the labor supply. You know what? You get inflation, lots and lots of inflation. That's a fair bet. One possibility or one likelihood, an M&A environment, very buoyant, very buoyant. All the regulatory guardrails are probably going to go away, and you're going to have pro-private equity tax policies that encourage M&A work. So that's going to be new. The Pentagon has demanded that each service come up with 8% cuts. They've been given some latitude in what they do and how they do. What gets the benefit of those 8% diversions? One is new selected players, your Palantirs, your Shield AIs, your Andurils. They've decided they want to give the new players, which have purportedly put skin in the game, other investors' money skin anyway. So there's going to be a lot of new entrants in defense. Already, the single biggest market capitalization for a defense company right now, I think, is Palantir, which has $3 billion in revenue. So there's a lot of big expectations. Also, 5 systems I think are going to do extremely well. Nuclear, missile defense, Golden Dome as it's now called, naval systems, particularly submarines, missiles and munitions. Space suppliers, SpaceX, Blue Origin, big beneficiaries. Foreign defense companies, if that's not for the US market, that is for anybody who wants to help Europe go its own way, because frankly, very few people are going to trust us anymore, to put it gently. Whether you're in France or whether you're in South Korea or Japan or whether you're in Britain, Rheinmetall in Germany, all of them are doing exceedingly well because frankly, people were looking to source outside the US. That's a major sea change. As a consequence, one of the losers might be multinational defense supplier companies. They might risk being drowned between here and there. Land vehicles, that's not good. In Europe, they'll do fine. In the US, not so much. Ditto for tactical fighters, not so much. US exports are going to be potentially catastrophic. That's going to really hurt a lot. And that again is a function of, well, American clients like Canada or Germany or Switzerland or Finland deciding they simply don't like American foreign policy and trade policy anymore and looking to source from somebody else. Next page, please. We're still pretty buoyant in terms of military aircraft. You look at the big winners, boy, the B-21 looks like a terrific growth story, doing extremely well. And I think the administration is going to favor it. FAXX, probably going to be selected sometime in the next week or two. Boeing versus Northrop Grumman, going to be really interesting to watch. NGAD, you'll start to see numbers early next decade. Boeing has won that. Congratulations, Boeing. F-35, downward pressure, that could get worse, partly because of the risk of international demand defecting to alternative production, and partly because, frankly, Elon Musk hates it, and it might fall out of favor in the US defense budget. So those are the big winners. Also, collaborative combat aircraft. You're going to see more and more output, more procurement resources devoted towards these things. They, of course, are smaller combat aircraft, either autonomous or remotely controlled, operating in conjunction with bigger planes. Anduril, a big player there, Kratos, a big player there, and the traditional legacy primes certainly playing some kind of role too. Next page, please. In Europe, better and better. You do have a bit of an issue. more European resources are being diverted towards next generation combat aircraft programs like GCAP, the Global Combat Aircraft Program, or FCAS, the Future Combat Air System. And as a consequence, you're going to see a bit of a valley in the middle of the next decade, and then things ramp up as the new programs really get going and begin to tool up for these new requirements. But the next couple of years and through basically the next 7 or 8 years look really good from a growth standpoint. Next page, please. Now, as I mentioned, one big theme in the defense business, and indeed the emerging and indeed the aerospace business, is a greater interest in emerging producers, basically countries out there seeking a higher level of sovereignty, whether it's Korea or whether it's India or whether it's Turkey or whether it's Brazil or Japan. All of these countries are ramping up. So the market for what you might call homegrown airframes is going from about 2 billion a year to something like 3 times that, and could go higher still. And again, when GCAP and other cooperative programs kick in, you'll see further growth. So if you're a machine tool maker, you might find yourself getting out there on the road and hopefully not encountering too many trade barriers, because frankly, all the opportunities there's going to be an awful lot of opportunities abroad. And I believe that might be it for my prepared comments. Do I have that right? Sorry, next page, please. Yep, that is it for my prepared comments. I'm happy to talk about anything. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you, Richard. That's a very enlightening look at things and helps give us a better idea on what to expect for aerospace markets. We'll take a few questions. One of the first one is, what are your thoughts on level playing field with tariffs across the globe?
I would love it. We had that. ATCA was an amazing treaty. The Agreement on Trade in Civil Aircraft, you can Google it. I wrote a chapter in an academic book about 20 years ago saying it was arguably the best trade treaty of all time. Now, the bad news is some people weren't signatories, most notably China and India. But from everybody else, people ask, wow, why is Air France such a great Boeing customer? Because of ATCA. We are now abrogating ATCA, which kind of makes me rather sad, and it's extremely dangerous. I don't know how to get back. ATCA was created in 1973 and fully implemented in 1980. Takes a long time to implement free trade, and we have to get back there. But as of right now, we're moving in the opposite direction. That's really bad. And I should mention, by the way, that even though China flirted with, various trade protection measures, there were no real barriers. I mean, they played around with orders in terms of favoring one over the other, but it's not like there were big tariffs on Airbus or Boeing jets. Similarly, India's tariffs were minimal. So this simply hasn't been a feature of the landscape for a very long time, since before 1980, really. My chapter in that Johns Hopkins book, I think you can also search it. I wrote it 20 years ago thinking, wow, thank God we dealt with that. We have free trade. The world is always going to be great. So there's a lot of stuff in the universe that wasn't dreamt of in my head. Anyway, I'd love to see you get back to that.
Okay. Another question, is the tariff storm a good opportunity for near-term growth within the indigenous Chinese and Russian civil aerospace industries with the serious launch of their respective airliners?
God, yeah. I mean, it's one of those quirks. There are so many things about the tariffs that have been proposed that absolutely favor China. People were looking for China to retaliate. And the first thing they did wasn't to retaliate. The first thing they did was reach out to our trading partners and allies in Asia, particularly South Korea and Japan, saying, let's talk. We're your new friends. And I'll bet this extends to the aerospace front sooner than I would like. I mean, if you look at the damage done to Boeing by these tariffs, they're immense. And if you look at the damage done to Chinese jets, none. So this is the ultimate own goal. We've shot ourselves in the foot, and for the first time ever, I spent my entire career poo-pooing China's chances of getting into the jetliner business. And now I'm thinking, wow, we've given them a chance. How good is that? Welcome, Comac. That's really depressing, but yes, is the answer.
Okay. One questioner asks, we're also seeing a downturn in uptake of professional development and workforce development products in the broader civil aerospace markets. What accounts for this other than budget cuts? Because historically, in tough job growth times, professionals go for training, that next degree or certification. We don't see that happening right now. Thoughts?
Yeah, we sure are. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's, a lot of it, of course, is also the visa issue. People thought that cracking down on illegal immigrants basically affected, I don't know, farm workers or what have you, but it also affects H-1Bs, which explains the tension between the Silicon Valley supporters of Trump and the traditional supporters of Trump. But that's an issue. Part of it is uncertainty. Part of it is funding cutbacks for sure. It's a bunch of stuff that's not welcome because workforce development is one of the most important parts of the industry and gearing it up for future competitiveness. So yeah, I'm concerned about that.
All right. Do we know when the FAA will remove the 38 plane per month cap on Boeing 737 MAX production?
Here again, we've shot ourselves in the foot. This is a resource issue. First of all, Boeing hasn't yet demonstrated the ability to get to rate 38. That's on Boeing. Yeah, technically, superficially, they got to 41 by delivering aircraft that had already been built and were ready to go, but were delayed because of the strike last year. But I think the last month was, 5 aircraft light of 38, I think. We expect they can get there. Here's the problem. DOGE seems to have mostly spared air traffic controllers, although there have been a lot of adjacent cuts to safety that concern me, quite frankly. But they haven't been good for the FAA workforce at all. And you know what? That 38 cap is dependent upon adequate resources to certify each plane individually, mandated. And that's the way it has to be until Boeing can, earn its trust back. But if there aren't the necessary FAA inspectors, that might be a break on things. So I'm hoping, Brian Bedford, the new FAA, I think he's a good guy for the job. I hope he can argue for the resources. We need to stop whatever DOGE is doing, anything related to aviation, because that Silicon Valley of move fast and break things is really toxic. Maybe there are other parts of I'm not qualified to talk about other parts of the government, but in aviation, oh, hell no. So we need the necessary resources to get to 38, and then we can talk about getting beyond that. And hopefully we'll get to where demand allows or where demand requires, which is frankly in the 50s. That would be great. And it would do an awful lot of good to restore Boeing's finances if they got to rate 50 something.
All right. Let's see. Oh, do you have any thoughts or updates on the advanced air mobility and eVTOL markets? And you might
Yeah,
throw in Boom
boy.
Supersonic with that as well.
Yeah. I've always regarded Boom, to be gentle, as a bit of a value trap. Look, they mean well, but they're not aerospace folks. Lately, they've been doing some flight tests with a, scaled aircraft. You should be aware that the engines they're using are antiques. They are literally antiques. These engines, the J85 series, they ended production half a century ago. You need a new engine to make this happen. And both, there's the 3 people in the world who can do an engine: Rolls-Royce, Pratt and Whitney, and GE. All of them have said no. So Boom has said, we'll do it ourselves. Okay, this is nonsense, complete nonsense. So as long as they attract investment with this, they'll stay alive. But the odds of them succeeding in building an engine for this jet, unless they convert Rolls, Pratt, and GE to do it for them, zero, zilch. It doesn't work like that in this industry. As for eVTOLs, we've had a day of reckoning coming because frankly, there are way too many people who want to get into a purely speculative market. So far, of course, casualties in the recent quarter: Lilium and Volocopter. More coming, many more coming. Some will survive, maybe after bankruptcy restructuring. But frankly, these have always been speculative. And I've always found myself wondering what it is they really offer that a helicopter doesn't. It's kind of interesting. The most intriguing new entrant in that market is Robinson. A couple weeks ago, they launched the R88, which would, from a price and capability standpoint, seem to be right at the heart of things. What a cool product. But it doesn't get the sexiness of an electric. And, maybe someone will succeed with an electric, but right now we're just watching the start of what I expect will be a series of bankruptcies.
All right, I'm going to combine a couple questions here that have to do with the F-35. One involves the F-35 has a complex international supply chain. Can that supply chain be moved to the U.S.? Can it be done quickly? If it can't, will the tariffs become, or will they make the F-35 prohibitively expensive? Also, you have countries like Canada threatening to withdraw from the F-35 program. Can they operate another platform in that role, such as the Saab Gripen?
I'll take the second one first. Yes, they can, and they probably will. When you threaten a country's territorial sovereignty, it's very difficult to get them to buy weapons from you. This is as basic as it gets. In Canada, there's a lot of anger. I don't blame them. Denmark is now stuck with an F-35 fleet. How do you defend Greenland against what the Trump administration says it will do? When they could lose support for that plane or simply have it turned off by a kill switch. This is a way to make enemies and not sell aircraft. Can you move F-35 production back home? We've had the experience. Turkey left, we forced Turkey out because they purchased Russian surface-to-air missile systems, and it was agonizing. Turkey was like 1 or 2%. So you start bringing back the double-digit percentage that's abroad. That takes decades and many, many tens of billions of dollars. And of course, you lose all those customers. So yeah, the F-35 simply gets a lot more expensive because guess what? In these tariffs, there is no national security exemption. Even better, weird. There is a provision of drawback in any tariff, which basically means that if you're Lockheed Martin and you import, say, I don't know, a lift fan component or something from, say, Britain, you get credit for paying that if you export the plane. So you pay the import, but then you get the export back. But if you sell it to a domestic producer, e.g. the taxpayer, you don't get it back. So guess what? It only gets more expensive for the taxpayer, not for foreign customers. This is just weird. These tariffs appear to have been implemented by as the general agreement is now, an AI chatbot without any kind of interference from human experts.
I understand that Custom and Border Protection will be enforcing the tariffs. Will that create another bottleneck because of all the different countries will have different tariffs involved, and unless they really ramp up, anything coming into the U.S. will probably be delayed for some reason or another?
Yeah, it's incredibly labor intensive and bureaucracy intensive to do this, especially if there's drawback, which is again, that, the credit you get if you import something, then export it. So the amount of paperwork is monstrous. DOJ has to go into overdrive and hire many thousands of people, many, many thousands of people. And if they don't, the industry breaks down. It just does. It doesn't function. This gets ugly fast. And that's another reason that things have to go away, because otherwise things just seize up.
Okay. You talked about some of the opportunities in countries outside of the U.S. How about Boeing and their exposure to like the Indian economy? They're doing a lot of parts manufacturing there, and presumably those will or won't be subject to tariffs depending on exclusions for aerospace products. Thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. We've been living in this ACTA world, agreement on trade and civil aircraft, for half a century. Everyone was prepared to continue that, so investments have been made all over the globe. Wow, I don't know how this plays out. I really don't, but no one knows how any of this is going to play out. And again, you've got this weird thing. Let's say you bring in a structural component from India and to a Boeing jet. Boeing pays the import, but then gets that export credit. But what if they sell it to an American airline? In other words, the letter of the law right now kills US airlines. They have to pay more for their jets because they don't get that drawback rebate. Now, that's assuming the big thing here, again, I can't urge people enough. Look at this Howmet force majeure issue that came out this weekend. And again, Howmet was the first to say, as everyone looks at each other and says, who pays, who pays, who pays? Howmet said, I don't know, but it's not us. Force majeure, all contracts are null and void if we want them to be. What if everyone does that? The industry seizes up, and you're starting to see signs that that might actually happen. Look, I can't, I keep coming back to this, but unless something happens in Washington to stop this nonsense, this industry seizes up, and I suspect a lot of the rest of the economy seizes up too.
Okay, let's assume that the tariffs are resolved. How soon will Boeing be ready to start increasing production? Do they have the capabilities now in their supply chain? If they were able to go beyond 38 per month for the 737?
I think they were getting to a point in terms of their people and their supply chain that our expectation was 38 a month in December. They get there end of the year, and then move well into the 40s next year. It looks like they finally got their act together. Kelly Ortberg is the right guy for the job. I think he's a lot closer to what's happening. He's made a few moves that I think maybe were a little uncertain at first, but in general, things seem to be going okay. Obviously, completing the Spirit purchase is a big issue there because that's been held up for a variety of reasons. But getting Spirit back in-house is a key part of that production ramp process. And obviously, making good all of Spirit's myriad financial issues by having it owned in-house. But the other big variable, again, is the adequate number of FAA inspectors needed to even get to 38. We just don't know about that. There's no better way to alienate a workforce by to tell them that, oh, hey, why don't you quit? We don't need you anymore. And if you don't quit, you might be fired. And we need people. We don't need to get rid of people. We need new people. We need more people. We need to keep the people we've got. Resources.
All right, back to the defense realm. Can you speak a little more on what you see coming on the collaborative aircraft segment and some of the other military programs, the MQ-25 and other unmanned or uncrewed vehicles?
Yeah, really intriguing stuff. As you know, Anduril and General Atomics won the latest increment of CCA. Now, one big complication is Anduril has never really built anything. There's a lot of really cool people there. They have really great ideas, but hey, managing a supply chain and doing a production ramp, that's its own black art. That's a unique skill. They're going to have to learn that. But it's an intriguing company. There's lots of other experiments out there with airframes. Obviously, Boeing's Ghost Bat MQ-28 is sort of not MQ. Yes, it is MQ. You get all your MQs confused. MQ-25, of course, the Navy air-to-air refueling plane. Could there be a strike version of that? Absolutely. The Navy now says it's effectively going to draft in the Air Force's wake, so probably look for some degree of collaboration with these collaborative aircraft. That's interesting. It's going to take a while before we get the doctrine right, before we get the operating software. We're talking about a 2030 story before the sky is starting to get darkened with CCAs. But nevertheless, it is one of the more exciting new growth markets we've seen out there.
Are some of these defense programs to the stage where they will be competing for the same raw materials as the commercial aircraft, and if at what point these come back? It sounds like a lot of these programs are actually ramping up to cut metal. We also have hypersonics and other markets. Your thoughts?
Yeah, there's all sorts of interesting potential bottlenecks. A big part of the question mark is whether or not Russian titanium milled product comes back online. The sponge part is less of an issue, but the milled product, gosh, we don't know. And we've been sort of coasting on inventories to a certain extent. But if it doesn't come back online for whatever reason, and new investments aren't made at a quicker pace, and you do the production ramp, then Absolutely. You could see that as a big bottleneck. And you're seeing issues, nickel certainly is an area of concern in the engine ecosystem for the ramp up. Now you've got the added question of these tariffs, because obviously aluminum coming in from Canada, steel. Um, I, oh boy, I do not understand this at all, especially since a lot of the value add for these metals is south of the border. Um, Having said that, it's probably less of a concern than every other part of the aerospace supply chain. So I think we'll find a way to cope. But yeah, this whole simultaneous civil and military upturn, it does threaten to create new bottlenecks, particularly in the metals front, no question.
Okay. You mentioned some of the tariffs back in the 80s. Can you make any comparison to how those are today, or is that
Not really,
relevant?
because we haven't gotten into, like everyone, I'm checking the newspaper headlines every hour, but we don't know what the retaliation look like. For comic relief, you've got the Commerce Secretary saying, whatever you do, don't retaliate, which is one of those Fletch from Chevy Chase, gun pointed at head, go ahead, make my day moments. We're waiting for that horrible moment when we start to see retaliation. But already we're not back to the 80s, we're back to the 30s from the US standpoint. No, I should say 20s. Or whenever Smoot-Hawley came in 1929 and ruined the world economy, we're back in that territory. What other people decide to do is what determines just how unprecedented these tariffs are. And it's looking like we're going back 100 years, maybe more. But the really terrifying aspect of it is what if the rest of the world trades without us? What if China's overtures to our allies get responded to? What if the EU and China find accommodation? What if Canada and everybody just create a giant non-US trade pact saying, oh, let the US stew in its own juices? In which case, the rest of the world is fine and the US simply gets a lot poorer fast.
I have a question about commercial space. What's the growth potential in satellites built in the US, and will they be crippled by tariffs? And which companies do you see as prospective leaders in that field?
It's tough to bet against SpaceX and Blue Origin. They're both doing really well. Rocket Lab and other the newcomers are kind of intriguing too. Solid market, really good. I haven't even thought about tariffs there, but oh boy, I'll bet that's an issue. And frankly, workforces too, H-1B visas, all of these things. That's another great area of concern. Haven't even gotten to that.
All right. A company like Airbus, will they be able to source materials and components from overseas, obviously without the restrictions of tariffs from their view? And how does that impact their operations, say, in the US?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the US is one of their big sources of things, engines in particular. So Airbus is fine right now. Like if the EU were to not retaliate, Airbus would be a big winner here. What they would do is basically say, hey, US airlines, you're only 15% or so of our demand, and frankly, we're supply constrained anyway. So you want our jet, you have to pay your stupid tariff. Force majeure. The complication is, what if the EU retaliates and makes Airbus's costs more expensive? What I would expect the EU to be smart enough to do is to say, our retaliation against the US is going to be targeted. We're not so stupid as to cripple our national jetliner prime the way the US is crippling its national jetliner prime. So the most likely scenario is that Airbus is an enormous winner here.
Well, I see we're just about out of time. Thank you, Richard, for your presentation and responses. I've had a number of people also, instead of putting questions, put thank yous out to you for helping to clarify the situation. And we thank our attendees for their questions. Thanks again to our manufacturing group series sponsor, Renishaw, Nagata, OSG USA, Solar Atmospheres, and Soralus. Be sure to register for our upcoming free webinars at the events menu tab of our websites. If you have any comments or suggestions, please email them to me at ebrothers@gie.net. On behalf of Aerospace Manufacturing Design, I wish you a good day and goodbye for now.
You can listen to all of our episodes of Manufacturing Matters and Lunch and Learn podcast from the MFG Radio Network on Spotify, Apple Music, and on our websites, todaysmedicaldevelopments.com, aerospacemanufacturinganddesign.com, defenseandmunitions.com, and evdesignandmanufacturing.com.